Hi, good evening. It's March. It's the monthly Facebook Live event. This is postponed, of course, from last week because Facebook was down globally. So there was nothing I could do about that. But truth be known, I was pretty exhausted last week. So it was maybe a blessing in disguise. So delighted to be with you again this evening. The topic for this month is staying positive in challenging times, staying upbeat in challenging times. And I'm not talking about, geopolitical things here. I'm not talking about Brexit or any of those big politics. I'm talking about things that affect us much more personally. And we all have those challenging experiences. I see Mary is watching. Thank you, Mary. So tonight, as I say, it's about staying positive in challenging times. And I think for most people that I work with, for most coaching clients, they've come to me because they have some sort of challenge. And in my work with coaching clients, I perhaps help people to reframe those scenarios and to move forward. So as ever with these live events, if what I'm saying is resonating, give me an old thumbs up or pass a comment or ask a question. If you know of anyone who might find this workshop useful, please tag them in it. And of course you can watch it again on my news feed. I know last time I had many people making comments afterwards thinking I was still live, but it's only live if you're watching now at 8:30 on Tuesday evening. But as I say, you can watch the recording over and over to your heart's content. So in this little 25-minute, half an hour session, I'm going to be sharing with you 5 or 6 practical things that we can do to maybe build on our sense of resilience or sense of being a little bit more upbeat or sense of empowerment at those times that are a bit more challenging. And it's interesting because I'm a bit challenged at the minute myself. I had a filling last week which we thought might work and solve an issue that I have with a back tooth, but it looks as if I'll be getting some root canal work next week. So that is a challenging time for me. So I apply these scenarios myself, and of course the old adage of you teach what you need to learn. Crystal's joining us all the way from Cork along with some family members. Crystal, wouldn't be the same without you. Thanks for tuning in tonight. As I say, this is the rescheduled one from last week. The topic is staying positive in challenging times. So let me start with a concept that I shared for the first time at my event in the Westbury back in January. Hard to believe that's what, January, February, March, time goes by, which is the whole concept of the emotional scales. And this is something that I came across many years ago, but it's come back into my own life in the last 8 or 9 months. And I have to say it's something that I'm referring back to again and again. So with the emotional scales, if you think of it like either a spiral or a continuum, a vertical continuum, a straight line down with an axis across the middle. And everything that's above the line is positive emotions, so it might go from, contented, happiness, joy, ecstasy, I don't know what, excitement right at the top. And of course, below the line, we have those emotions that are a bit more heavy and a bit weightier. Stress, overwhelm, just when we're not feeling quite as good. So that's the emotional scales. And if we think about it, is it possible to stay on the positive side of that emotional scales all the time? Well, no, because we're human. We would, of course, have those times when we're feeling stressed, overwhelmed, down, sad, frustrated, impatient, just low, blah, even. Because that's what being human is. And what I find with myself in challenging scenarios or just times when I want to feel better, because ultimately that's all we want. We want to feel as good as we can, as frequently as we can. We're looking for ways of climbing that emotional scales. And many of the tips I'm sharing with you tonight, I view as like the handrails of that scales, so that I'm just trying to feel a little better. So if you think of extremes of those scales, whereas maybe down the bottom of it you have, being very low or depressed or down, is it possible to go right the way up to excitement and happy and joyful? Probably not. We're just looking at taking steps up that so we feel a little bit lighter and maybe getting to neutral, which is just something like maybe contentment. So for those of you who are joining in, Stephen, hi. I really appreciate you tuning in on this dark March evening. And as I say, if you find what I'm saying resonating, give me the thumbs up or connect it or pass a comment, forward it on to someone else. So let's get stuck in. 5 or 6 strategies for climbing those emotional scales. The first one is about acknowledging where you're at, acknowledging the feeling. I know maybe too many people who try to brush away their feelings, and to be human is to feel emotion. I think with everything in nature, it's up, down, black, white, hot, cold, light and shade. Without maybe having those times when we are feeling lower, we don't necessarily appreciate those times when we're feeling better, or we don't have that sense of contrast in terms of what it is I would like. Sometimes we start from a place of what it is I don't want, that whole contrast to tune in to get greater clarity. So oftentimes I find that society gives us maybe advice on how to deal with some emotions, but not all emotions. The most common, maybe heavier emotion that we get advice on is that of grief. My family had a bereavement at Christmas time, and as the saying goes, grief is the price you pay for love. And oftentimes with grief, the advice we get is to sit in it and allow it to wash over us, not to try to push it away, because maybe it'll just scream louder for attention. But if we sit in it, something else will eventually replace it. So whatever we're feeling, first thing to do is just to acknowledge it. It's like, I'm human here. I feel sad, I feel low, I feel down. Let me just sit in it and breathe through it. I would come from a place that all emotion is communicating something to us, because if we're feeling low, down, frustrated, if I sit in it and just ask myself, well, what's going on here? What's happening? Now, I'll share in a little while some of the other things that tend to stimulate those emotions within us. But one of the things that I find as a great fan of the teacher and the speaker, Abraham Hicks, I'm sure some of you have come across them. If not, stick the name Abraham Hicks into YouTube and you'll get plenty of cutting edge material, let's put it that way. But I have to say, over the last few years, it's probably been one of my main teachers. But the Abraham Hicks teaching goes something like, negative emotion is an indication of how far we've drifted from our true selves. From our loving, caring, spiritual beings that we all are. So negative emotion, an indication that we've drifted out of alignment. So if I'm paying attention to how I'm feeling and I'm feeling a bit low or flat, it just gives me a little prompt to maybe realign or recenter myself or resource myself. And, as I always say, I think I've said it at probably every, Facebook Live event that I've done, we're not human beings, we're human beings. And what makes us beings, as opposed to human doings, is the fact that we feel emotions all the time. So strategy one for maybe staying positive in challenging times is to acknowledge the emotion that we're in and to breathe through it, and maybe to get curious as to what might this be teaching me or prompting me to pay attention to. And of course, when I pay attention to the negative emotion, it immediately gives me contrast, because by contrast, it's like, well, I don't want this, therefore I'm looking for the opposite of it. So I might know how to get there, but at least I have information as to where the misalignment is, as it were. Second one, this is one that I've shared with groups in a business context before, but not really on a personal nature. One of the things that I find that at the highest level is one of the stimuli, I should say, of feeling low, is the difference between expectations and reality. So we'll all have expectations, as to how we would like to be managed, or expectations as to where I want to be at a certain stage in life, or expectations around quality of relationships, or expectations around, money in the bank. I'll also have expectations of other people and how I want other people to treat me. Think of it very simply, like maybe at Christmas time you had expectation of getting a certain gift. If the reality that you experienced was greater than your expectation, well, then the result is above the line emotion. You feel really happy, your expectation was exceeded. Of course, the opposite might also happen. I'm expecting a certain type of gift, the reality was something less than that, and therefore I'm feeling low or flat. So at the highest level, that's the balance that's going on here. Graham, Sophie, Dave, thank you for tuning in. So you're welcome to this month's Facebook Live event. It's all about staying positive in challenging times, and I'm sharing a few little strategies and tips along the way. So if we go back to that piece around expectation versus reality, oftentimes what happens when we go through a period of time where reality does not meet our expectations, what we often do then is downplay our expectations. And the dropping of expectation to meet reality is the birth of cynicism. That's where, if you come across people in organizations who are quite cynical, at one stage they were idealists, then they became frustrated idealists, and they've downgraded their expectations as to how things could or should be to match reality as it is, all as a way of tolerating a certain heavy emotion. So what can we do with this? I'm never a fan of downgrading expectations, because that will often feel like selling ourselves short or self-betrayal. Hi Sophie, good for you to tune in. And in a work scenario, what do some people do? Well, they change their reality. Some people resign and leave, and some people resign and stay, which is often worse. But we're always juggling that juxtaposition between expectations as to how things could or should be and reality as I'm experiencing it. And one of the things that I find for myself with expectations is it can be closely aligned with control. So I have expectations as to how I want the world to work for me, but the world will often not necessarily work the way I want it to work, and that's something that I always have to deal with. And the antidote to control, as we know, is greater levels of trust that bigger things are working its way out. What I also find as well is it is very difficult to move forward. And by moving forward, I really mean moving forward in a way where we feel a little bit more empowered or upbeat, without acknowledging reality as it is, or without accepting, without making peace with reality. And that doesn't mean getting resigned or giving up. But think of it this way, if you're interacting with someone and you find them a difficult sort of individual, they're not that open or friendly, we can wish that we want them to be different as much as we like, but leopards do not change their spots. And you can't move forward in your dealings with that person until you accept them for who they are. Dogs bark, cats meow, angry people are angry people. They are what they are. And I can only move forward in that relationship when I accept them for who they are. But ultimately, my job is to sort out my own relationship with them. So think of it this way, this is you and someone else. So in every relationship, we only do 50% of the relating, but so often we will blame other people for how we're feeling. I mean, just think of it this way. How many of us, how frequently want other people to change their attitudes or behaviors so that we can feel better? Now, when you say that out loud, it sounds absolutely bonkers, but that is what we do. We want someone else to change their attitude or behavior so we can feel better. Whereas our job is to sort out our own feelings to start with. Yeah, that's resonating with one or two people I can see. And again, I teach what I need to learn, so that's something that I'm always checking myself with. I'm a great fan of that Mother Teresa quote. If everyone swept their own doorstep, the whole world would be clean. And so often in this area of relationships and of staying positive in challenging times, it is about getting that broom out and giving our own doorstep a good old sweep, and not pointing the finger at other people and their dirty doorsteps, as it were. Perhaps that's a new version of that old Bible quote of, not seeing the splinter in someone else's eye, or what's it, seeing the splinter in someone else's eye and not seeing the plank in your own. So I say thank you for joining tonight. I'm sharing some tips on how to stay positive in challenging times. First little tip I shared already was around acknowledging the emotion that you're in. It's giving you contrast, maybe an indication as to what it is you want. But if we fight against emotions, I think they often get louder and louder because they're looking for our attention. And if I pay attention, which is one of the acronyms for PAIN, P-A-I-N, pay attention in words now, it gives me maybe some clues as to opportunity for learning, let's say. The second little tip there was about that balance between expectation and reality. And it's not about downgrading our expectations. It's about accepting or making peace with reality as it is and looking for a way of reframing my relationship with the external stimulus that maybe I'm in the habit of responding to in a less than positive way. Sophie said, it's difficult when boundaries need to be set though. Oh, boundaries might be the topic for another Facebook Live event. There's so many layers to boundaries. That's probably a pun or a paradox within itself. For me, boundaries come to, what will I tolerate? What will I not tolerate? Where have I compromised too much? What approach would make me feel most proud about myself? Where have I betrayed myself? Which is a very difficult concept. But I often think in this area, it's not one quick fix. It's not like I don't know what's that phrase. It's not like a college degree. You pass the exam, you have the certificate, you have it forever. This is a bit more like CPD, a continuous professional development. It's almost in the moment you're working on it. Third one, this will resonate with a few people. It's one that resonates with me as well. Third way of staying more upbeat in challenging times is stop the self-persecution. It's like we are all so tough on ourselves. And it's a bit like if you think about, say, people you like, people you admire, people you love, good friends, good colleagues. We speak about them in a way that's gentle and supportive. Rarely will we do that to ourselves. We'll usually screech at ourselves and put ourselves down and criticize ourselves for being human. So sometimes what we have to do is just literally pay attention to that voice in our head and how gentle am I speaking about myself. Again, it's something that I'm paying attention to a lot. And what I tend to find is when I'm feeling low, frustrated, overwhelmed, stressed, worried, anxious, all of those cocktails of emotions, it usually goes hand in hand with that inner self-critical voice. There's the reality of a situation, which I mentioned in point 2, and then there's my thinking about the reality of the scenario. And that brings us into the concept of the stories we tell ourselves in our heads. We have habits of stories. If I'm doing a little bit on thinking habits with groups, I'll often say, on average, we have 80,000 thoughts a day in our heads. Brain's a wonderful piece of equipment. But oftentimes, daily, sometimes 80% of those thoughts are the same every day. So if you think about behavioral habits we have, they're all preceded by thinking habits. And we will have habits about how we think about certain situations and certain people, but we'll also have habits of how we think about ourselves and how we self-identify. So see, Crystal saying our inner critic is way too loud in my head. We all have that inner critic. Crystal, there is, we just have to learn to dance with it. That's the phrase that I sort of use, because I often think it's the same voice that says, hurry up and cross the street, that car's coming quicker than you think. It's part of our self-defense mechanism. But sometimes we just need to let it know who's really in charge. That story we're telling ourselves, though, brings me into the territory of another powerful insight I got recently, actually. And it came to me in work I was doing with some interview skills clients. It's an area I work with people on fairly frequently. And most people going to interview are nervous and anxious, and they're feeling very, how would I say it, self-conscious around the whole interview process, and in that challenging situation, they're just looking to feel a little better, maybe a little calmer, or a little bit more courageous, or a bit more natural, or a bit more genuine, or a bit more upbeat. And at the root cause of so much, how would I say it, negative energy around interviews is the fear that we have that the interviewers in this case will be judging us negatively. But then I was thinking about it and I was saying, that's not just for interviews. I think that's for life. I often think the two areas that I tend to specialize in with clients, presentation skills coaching, or with groups, I should say, presentation skills coaching and interview skills coaching, is like a microcosm for some life sort of issues. And I just see, Sophie has a comment here. I hear someone on the radio call the inner critic the mad woman. Okay, referring to the character from Jane Eyre. Was Jane Eyre the one where there was someone up in the attic at the end? If I'm thinking maybe up in the attic. I think sometimes, Sophie, with that inner critic, the gremlin voice, we come across different names for it. Sometimes even in some cultures they say it's devil's voice almost. Where we have that voice of love and we have that voice of fear, which is the light and shade again. Whatever way we label it, I think sometimes if we can identify it for what it is and maybe go into different dialogue with it, that's what I do. Sometimes I just have to tell it to go away in language that's a bit more blunt than that. But let me go back to this piece about the parallel with interviews. So at interviews, most candidates are feeling nervous because they think the interviewers will be judging them negatively. That's often the story that we're telling us in wider life as well. It's like, I'm feeling nervous, anxious, uncomfortable because I think other people are judging me negatively. But perception is projection. So one of the big ahas for me recently was, if I'm thinking other people are judging me negatively, in that moment I'm judging them negatively. Like I'm thinking the worst of them, and I'm projecting onto them that they're thinking the worst of me. So if I'm fearing someone else is judging me negatively, in that moment I'm judging them negatively, and at the same time I'm also judging myself negatively. So I'm judging me, judging them, judging me. I think that's like an episode. Yeah. Crystal saying yes, she burned the house down. Okay, gosh, we're bringing literary metaphors into this tonight. So anyway, I'm taking you through a few tips for staying more upbeat or more positive in challenging times. There was the first one around acknowledging how you're feeling, then looking at that relationship between expectations as to how I would like things to be and the reality, the way things are, and making peace with reality before I can move on. Then there's that piece around stop the self-persecution, paying attention to the stories we're telling about ourselves, and maybe to the perception I have of how other people are viewing me, whereas in reality, if I'm sweeping my own doorstep, maybe I need to tidy up some of my own thinking around how I'm viewing other people as well. So, fourth tip for climbing the handrails up the emotional scales is one that I think is a tip for every topic I do in a Facebook Live event. I could probably do this as a quiz and most of you would come up with the right answer, because one of the things that we can always rely on to shift our focus, our perception and our feelings is paying attention to gratitude. And I know from social media that one or two of you are dusting down that gratitude journal again. Gratitude is the antidote to worry, anxiousness, fear. You can't be grateful and fearful at the same time. We'll always find something to be grateful for. I've been in and out of hospitals recently, as you know. Even this morning I was with a dermatologist, and a thing that's been on my arm for years, probably as long as I can remember, is going to be removed. And yep, I'm human, so it's like, oh, okay, here we go again type of thing. But very quickly I'll follow that up with, well, isn't it great that this has been caught? Isn't it great that I have some world-class healthcare on my doorstep? Isn't it great that this can be dealt with quickly? Isn't it great that the consultant I had was such a lovely person this morning, which has not always been my experience of consultants. And that shift in focus just helps me feel better. That doesn't mean other thoughts won't come in, but as I said earlier, this stuff is like riding a bike. You either have balance in the moment or you don't. Yeah. So Crystal's saying, I started my new journal last night. I love new journals, Crystal. No matter what I'm putting in them, a new journal. I have a fetish for stationery, as anyone who knows me. So if I'm looking to climb the emotional scales, gratitude would always help, as will the learning focus or the learning lens. So it's like, what can I learn from this? What is life trying to teach me? There's the great Oprah quote, one of many, which is, life is always talking to you, but are you listening to it? Life is always talking, life is always giving you messages. Are you listening to it? It was interesting. I was delivering a workshop last week, and it was a fairly small room, about 15 people in it, 15, 20. And I was just doing a talk in the afternoon session. And one of the ladies closest to me at the top of the room was quite congested with a cold or a sinus infection. And what Bernie's putting up, isn't he great? I have a brilliant eldest brother. Thank you. Thank you, Bernie. It's like the family fan club. And this lady last week, she's at the top of the room, quite close to me, and she was very snuffly, sinus infection or a cold. And I'm going, this room was a bit stuffy, let me protect myself here because I don't want to pick up any germs, was the first thought that went through my head. But as the afternoon went on and we were exchanging a few words or questions or whatever, she said she suffers nearly constantly from a cold. She said it's not a sinus infection, it's a constant cold. She gets it, she's a week when she's better, it's off again. And she said she's exceptionally frustrated with it. And I just said to her, what might be trying to teach her? She said, oh, I know what it's trying to teach me. I'm running myself ragged. She said, I'm a single mom and I have 3 kids and I have a full-time job and there's travel associated with the job. She said, I've run myself ragged, and I just sort of maybe suggested to her to pay attention to her own self-care, because that cold was trying to teach her a lesson, and maybe if she didn't pay attention to the cold, life would be teaching you a lesson in a more of a direct way, or even a stronger way. So that was the fourth one, just to lean into gratitude and a learning lens. What's life trying to teach me here? Because at least in the moment, that will change my focus. Number 5, one that I go back to time and time again when I'm looking to change my perspective on something, when I'm looking to see a scenario from a higher viewpoint. It's the old, I think it was the Einstein quote, the same level of thinking that created the issue will not resolve it. We're back to sort of human doings and human beings again. And that question is, who do I want to be in this situation? So say even this morning when I was driving back from the consultant, knowing that I have to go in for a procedure in a few weeks' time, it's like, okay, who do I want to be in this scenario? Well, I don't want to be a moaning Minnie to start with. I don't want to be someone who is playing victim, which sometimes I can do a little bit, particularly when it comes to health. How do I want to be? Well, I want to be a bit more matter of fact around it. Who else do I want to be in this scenario? Well, I want to be courageous. I want to see this as as life teaching me a lesson, a little reminder to practice even better self-care. And when I put myself into that mindset, I said, okay, I've gotten out of this consultant now quicker than I thought. I didn't think I'd get to the gym this week because the schedule was so busy. But I said, no, I'm putting an hour and a half to one side. I said, let me practice some self-care now straight away, because that's who I wanted to be in this scenario. So who do I want to be in this situation? It's a bit like that contrast piece again. I don't want to be that, so who do I want to be? And oftentimes if we get the being bit right or in place, the doing naturally follows from it. Chris is saying, and have some self-compassion we could do with being a little more kinder to ourselves. Yes, absolutely, Crystal. That's probably a comment we can put up to every little Facebook Live event that I do. I think it's probably one of the themes that runs through it all. And certainly very relevant for tonight. Thank you for your comment. The last piece I want to share, the last strategy, and then I'll do a little bit of a recap, is one that I've pulled out of a new talk that I put together in the last little while, which is about high performance. But one of the concepts within that is about how we manage ourselves and our own sense of resilience and empowerment. And I felt it was relevant for tonight as well. And that's about finding a reason why, like going into the motive that sits within motivation. If we think about, say, sports people who've achieved things, and they say, what got you going? They're usually doing it for a noble cause, for a higher purpose, for something, someone beyond themselves. I did it to make my mom proud, or I did it to make my son proud. Oftentimes that's where we find motivation. And sometimes I think if we cannot find our motivations when times are good, it's going to be exceptionally difficult to find it when we're feeling more challenged. And I know for me, I'm very aware of my values, things that are important to me, things like ambition or recognition or reaching for my potential or learning or, adventure or curiosity. And sometimes it's through those lenses that I can find a new meaning on challenging times. As I say, what's this here going to teach me? What's the courageous thing to do? And equally as well to remember that sometimes things are happening for our highest good. In fact, most of the time I think things are happening for our highest good, but we may not actually be aware of that. When I think back over the last God knows how many years, there's been so many scenarios where I've been disappointed, where maybe a relationship didn't work out, but it had to break down for a better relationship to come along, or maybe a particular job or a role that I was after, and I was really disappointed for not getting it. Well, maybe that had to happen because something better needed to come along and did come along afterwards. And maybe that brings us back into the territory of, faith or trust. One that always comes to mind in that area is back, 20 plus years ago now, when I was employable, when I was working in a firm. I don't think I'm employable anymore because I speak truth to bullshit too frequently, I think. But I had applied for an internal management course, and I did the interview for it, and I thought I was the right profile, and I thought I had the right potential, and I knew the other people who were going for it, and I said, I think I have a really strong chance here. And there was 12 places, and I didn't even get one of them. And I remember being really disappointed and then borderline angry. And sometimes anger can be a motivation to, to climb that emotional scale. So it's like there's a bit of energy to it once it's directed in a certain way. And so I sort of said, well, feck this, I didn't get that course, but I'm going to go off and I'm going to do a real master's here, which I mainly self-funded. I got permission or release from the organisation to do it. It was part-time, which was a bit of a misnomer, but it took me 2 years, and I got my MBA. And that was one of the main doors that opened for me to move into the sort of work that I'm doing now. And at the time when I look back on it, I wouldn't have had the same exposure to people and to opportunities and to the world of coaching if I had gotten that course place initially. It's the old adage of a door closing and a window opening, or as I think it's the Oprah quote, or the Maya Angelou one, God has bigger dreams for you than you can dream for yourself. Bernadette is saying, no one could possibly afford you, you're too great. Oh, okay, I must have missed something. Michael saying, my mum used to say, what's for you won't go by you. Well, I absolutely believe that as well. And whether, they're cliches and we give them for a little bit of comfort, I don't know. But I think I have sufficient evidence in my own life to know that that's absolutely true. And even if we think about a cliche, if that makes me feel better, well, that's what tonight's all about anyway, is climbing the emotional scales. So I think I've rabbited on plenty tonight. I can't believe the half an hour is up already. Let me do a little bit of a recap on it. We're looking at strategies for feeling better, acknowledging the emotion, looking at that relationship between the expectations as to how things could be or should be and the reality of how they are, and making peace with that before we can move on. Stop the self-persecution, at least be aware of that voice in our heads. And remember that if I'm thinking other people are judging me negatively, odds are I'm already judging them negatively. And to clean that bit up. Let's look at this through a gratitude and a learning lens, as we always can. That's number 4. Who would I like to be in this situation? Sometimes it can just give me a higher perspective on it. I want to show up in a different way, and to lean into that a little. And then that last one, which I shared as well, is around looking at the reason why, like what's important to me here. Where does my motivation sit? What's the why that's driving it all? Why is it important for me to approach this in a different way or to move forward? It was interesting when I was contemplating this talk, because as I say, it was postponed last week because of the Facebook outage. But I have to say, I was working really hard on getting my state to a certain level last week to do it, because I was really quite tired, really quite exhausted for Wednesday of last week. And I said, even the universe could conspire to postpone my Facebook Live event. So I was in a better place for it, because I was sort of thinking the last thing I really wanted when I was feeling low was to have someone like me, a motivational speaker, giving me advice. I think sometimes if we're feeling a bit low, the last thing we want is advice from the outside in. So sometimes when I'm sharing tips from here, it's really about from the inside out. Because we do have our own wisdom, and maybe all I can do in some of these sessions is to pose a few questions or to share a few distinctions, that really allows you to connect with your own wisdom. As I always say to clients and and to groups, we're all the experts in being ourselves. No one's more expert in being you than you are. But hopefully tonight has been useful, and you've taken one or two little nuggets from it. Chris is saying, thank you, James. The topic came at the right moment for me, and I've gained much insight which is related to what's going on. Perfect. Timing's always perfect, Krista, and I appreciate your comments. Let me see if I can read all of these. In reference to your comment on your employability, yes. Yes, I wouldn't have it any different, but everything was right at the time. I often use the analogy, the play on the Stephen Covey phrase of, climbing the ladder. I climbed the ladder, but only realized it was against the wrong building after a while. But sometimes you have to climb the ladder to get the perspective from a higher the higher perspective, as it were. So as I say, if you've gotten some benefit from tonight, perfect. That's always my intention. Thank you for those who've shared your comments, for joining in. If you think of anyone else who might benefit from the content tonight, be sure to comment or to tag them in the comments. And then this will be available to playback as well on the Facebook page. If you've any other topics that you think you would like me to cover or that might be useful in the coming months, either message me separately or stick a comment up on this one as well, because I'm always open to taking those suggestions. So thank you for tuning in again tonight. I hope you found it beneficial. Keep your fingers crossed for me in my root canal next week. And until the next time, thank you.